With a pledge to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This is the Board of Adjustment public hearing. I got a few items to cover before we get started. Yeah, a lot of these are not pertinent. Sign in at the door. Yeah, detailed handout. Everybody's got what they need. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts. Land Services staff is here to assist the Board of Adjustment with its duties. The task of the Board of Adjustment is to consider requests for variances and appeals from an order, requirement, or decision made by a county planning official, county zoning official, in accordance with state law and county ordinance. Each request is considered on its own merit. The burden of proving a practical difficulty rests with the applicant. If a variance is granted, it is granted to the land, not to the landowner. There is a protocol for how we will proceed tonight. For each variance request on the agenda, we will hear a staff report, hear a testimony from the applicants, and then the board will discuss and gather more information as needed. Next, I will ask if there's anyone from the audience wishing to speak to the request, so I'll ask each party to come to the podium, state their name, address, give their testimony. Please be as factual as possible. Direct all statements and questions to me. After all testimony is complete, I will close the public hearing portion of the process. The board will then review and discuss the case in terms of finding of fact criteria as required by Minnesota statute and county ordinance. We will have a series of votes and discuss whether conditions may be made and have a final motion to approve or deny the request based on those findings. After this final vote on your requests, you may leave if you wish. All right. Staff report? Oh, the applicants come forward. I'm sorry. If the applicants would please come forward, pull the mic up really close to you and state your names for the record. This is all recorded, and so we need to be very clear and heard.
I'm Felicia Lucas Bush.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kevin Bush.
Thank you. And the staff report.
Okay, now I will give
Now
the staff
we're ready.
report. Okay, this is a variance to construct a dwelling within the Bluff Impact Zone, again located in Section 28 of Scandia Valley Township. The ordinance references for this request is Section 706B and E. And then here's a plat map of Scandia Valley Township, and the red dot is the location of the property. And then here's the variance request received from the applicant. And some site drawings also provided by the applicant. And then some letters also provided with the application and included in your packet. And here's an aerial photograph of the parcel, and then also some oblique imagery of the parcel. And then here's a shoreline view. And then here are photographs that were taken at the viewing. Again, the property is in Section 28 of Scandia Valley Township on Lake Alexander. The parcel is a conforming duplex lot size, which means it's at least 150 feet wide at the lake and 50,000 square feet in area. The parcel is 174.23 feet wide and 73,838 square feet. According to the assessor's records, a 936 square foot dwelling built in 1960 was the principal structure on the property. The dwelling has been removed. A boathouse remains on the property and a recreational vehicle was permitted in November of 2020. And then here is the survey showing the original home and its location. There are bluff conditions on the east side of the property. The top of the bluff runs east and west, and that was indicated on the enclosed survey and site plan. In November of 2019, the applicant requested a variance to construct a dwelling within the bluff and bluff impact zone, and that variance was denied. And then here are the findings from that variance request. In June 2020, the applicant requested a variance to construct a dwelling within the bluff impact zone, and that variance was denied. And then here are the conclusions from that hearing. A 30-foot structure setback is required from the top of the bluff. In addition, the area 30 feet from the top of the bluff is also defined as the bluff impact zone. On narrow lots, if a bluff is present, it typically runs the entire width of the lot, so the bluff impact zone and setback is directly behind the bluff. In this instance, bluff conditions are only present on the east side of the property. As with all structural setbacks, the setback is measured from the closest point of the structure to the closest point of the feature requiring setback. This is a unique bluff situation, so the Land Services Department requested clarification of the bluff setback from the Department of Natural Resources. The DNR area hydrologist clarified the structural setback requirement from top of bluff and that it applies in all directions, not just behind the bluff. And then here is that communication from the DNR. And then here is an illustration of what that setback looks like. The applicant is proposing to construct a new dwelling along the west side of the bluff within the bluff impact zone. The dwelling would have a 6-foot setback from the top of the bluff on the west side. And then here is a zoomed in version of the survey showing that. The submitted survey indicates a large building envelope, which is highlighted in blue on the next slide. At the 2020 variance hearing, the applicant stated the size of the building envelope is 41,500 square feet. It should be noted that does not include any setback from the shared driveway, as that is not regarded as a property line from a zoning standpoint. In addition, since the survey was completed, the road setback required in ordinance has been reduced from 50 feet to 40 feet, so the buildable envelope is larger when applying the current ordinance standard. And so here is the building envelope outlined in blue. Bluff standards and setbacks were adopted into the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance in 1991. The 30-foot structure setback from the top of the bluff within the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance is the same as what is found in Minnesota Shoreland Rule. The DNR sonar, which is the Statement of Need and Reasonableness, discusses the need for bluff setbacks. That was also included in your packet and is here as well. The general area is wooded with residential shoreline development. And then here is a zoomed out view of the neighborhood. According to county records, the property was transferred to the applicant in 2016. The impervious surface calc, including the proposed dwelling, is 8.9%, 25% is allowed. And the applicant attended a development review team meeting in preparation for this meeting in March of 2022. And then here are the notes from that meeting, which were also in your packet. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2, shoreline development, goal D1. And then the comprehensive water plan goals and objectives, the surface water goal, objective B, land use and development goal, objectives B and D. 164 notices were sent, and there was one comment that was received prior to the public, or actually two, sorry. And so I'll read those. The first one was from Dr. Bill Faber. He called in his comment. He stated there are bluff rules for a reason. Past practice of the Board of Adjustment has been to deny variances like this when alternatives exist. He is asking for consistency and that the applicants had the right to replace what they had but did not avail themselves of that opportunity. And then the other comment is from Mark Anderson from the Morrison County Department of, or from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I'll read that letter. I reviewed the materials submitted by Kevin and Felicia Bush regarding the May 2nd, 2023 variance request for building within the Bluff Impact Zone located within the Shoreland Zoning District of Lake Alexander. The minimum statewide standards require a 30-foot setback from the top of the bluff, and no structure placement is allowed within the Bluff Impact Zone. The Bluff Impact Zone is defined as the bluff and the land located within 20 feet of the top of the bluff. The statewide standards were designed to protect shoreland from negative impacts caused by developing in bluff areas. Consideration is given to bluff areas because of their vulnerability to erosion that cause water quality impacts. The Bluff Impact Zone is considered an area most susceptible to degradation, and even small amounts of development can dramatically affect a previously stable slope. In addition, development within the Bluff Impact Zone influences the scenic value and visual quality of users of the lake resource. Additionally, Morrison County has adopted a higher standard to the state Bluff Impact Zone regulation. Morrison County has implemented a 30-foot Bluff Impact Zone, protecting an additional 10 feet from development. This higher standard shows, in part, the value Morrison County places on protecting these features. The Minnesota DNR encourages local governmental units to apply higher standards when they intend to provide additional environmental protection to natural resources. Variances to shoreland standards are an important tool for balancing property rights with the public's right to clean water and healthy habitats. However, variances to shoreland standards should be rare and only for exceptional situations. The variance criteria in Minnesota statute must be used for determining these exceptional situations. As you hear this application, please keep these questions in mind. Has the applicant demonstrated that no feasible alternatives exist that would not require a variance, or considered alternatives that would reduce the extent of the variance? Is the application motivated by design preferences? Can this application be justified when there is an approximate 41,500 square foot building envelope? Can a variance on this property be justified when in fact the property owners have twice been denied a variance similar in nature, once in 2019 and again in 2020? In conclusion, Morrison County has taken initiative in adopting higher standards to protect bluffs and bluff impact zones. This shows the level of importance the county places on these features. Approving this variance would be contrary to the intent of the ordinance. As stated earlier, this property contains an approximate 41,500 square foot building envelope. A variance is not needed to construct a dwelling, nor to achieve reasonable use of their property, as that can be accomplished through a simple land use permit for construction of a dwelling. Due to this property having an approximate buildable area of 41,500 square feet, satisfying the statutory requirements for variance approval cannot likely be satisfied. Therefore, the Minnesota DNR recommends denial of this variance request. And that is all of the comments, and then here are your finding of fact and decision questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. For the record, I'd also like to record that last Friday, April 28th, at 1 o'clock, we were out for a viewing of the property. All 5 board members, Amy and Shannon Wetstein, were present at the time. And I'd like to commend the applicant. They did an excellent job of, taping off and showing us exactly where, where the constraints of the ordinance are, where the boundaries were, the bluff impact zone, the bluff itself, and what their desired plan is. So with that, do the applicants have anything to add to the staff report?
Yes, we do have a presentation to make. And I'm going to hand out the presentation. So I'm gonna read it, but I'm gonna give you a copy so you can follow along if you wish.
Thank you.
You?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. First part of it's going to be a little awkward since I wrote it before I met everybody. But
Can I just interrupt you for just a second?
Okay.
We have time constraints of 10 o'clock, is it? Or how are we going to deal with that? Because I think by looking at this, I mean, we're getting close.
Mr. Chair, you certainly can entertain a motion to finish out this application since it began before 10 PM.
Okay. And that would be a good time to do that now?
Yes, you certainly
Okay.
can.
Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I hope I can make it through it because my wife, the person watching her is going to be leaving at about 10 o'clock, but she might be okay for an hour or so. So if this gets real late, I may have to leave. Just so please respect that.
Okay, I move then that we extend this past 10 o'clock and finish this out. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we're good to go. I'm sorry I interrupted
Okay,
you.
that's all right, thank you. I'm certainly, we are certainly sympathetic with, how the long and the time that's been used already this evening. But, this is really, really important to us. And I wish that you could see this project through my eyes as an architect. Because when I look at, the possibilities for locating a cabin, I really think that anybody that owned this property would only put it in that 50 feet between kind of where the pine trees are and the lakeside. I don't think anybody would do anything else. And so it really pains me to think about having to build some other place because I think it's just a really bad place to build. But let me go through my presentation. So good evening, members of the board and county staff. I'm Kevin Bush. This is my wife, Felicia. We're hoping to build a cabin that was built actually in 1923. The staff report always says 1960. I imagine it has to do with when the zoning ordinance was first put in place. We tore it down in 2019. This is our third go at obtaining a variance for the new cabin. This application is different. The first two applications placed our cabin in the bluff on the property, and this one takes the cabin out of the bluff into the side setback. So you may think that we're a little crazy or even insane for attempting to obtain a variance, but we have a strong conviction that the proposed location compared to other options best conforms to the county's comprehensive plan, which would mean that the plan is also best for our neighbors and best for the county. For the record, I wanted to explain why we were asking for a variance for the third time. On the screen is the original survey dated December 2017, prepared by Fessler Surveying of Little Falls. At the time, the county required that a bluff determination be made by a licensed surveyor. We went through our first variance process using this survey. Our proposed cabin was located about 8 feet into the bluff and bluff setback. During the hearing, we were told that we just needed to move the cabin 8 feet out of the bluff and the setback and we could build. And they denied our application at the time. So as you can see from this survey, I've boxed in an additional, with some red lines, the additional setback that the county imposed on us. And so what happened was we tore down our cabin at the end of 2019, and in March 2020, I went up to get a building permit to build our cabin, and I was told when I got to the counter that there was an additional side setback, which is the box indicated with the red lines. Now you'll see that it's a box. It's actually like a circle. It's a half circle, but for all intents and purposes, it's a box because nobody's going to build like a wall that goes in a half circle around that space. So when we were denied the building permit, we kind of rushed into another variance because we had contractors lined up and we were ready to build and we wanted to get it going. And so during that process, we contacted a civil engineer who analyzed the bluff and gave us confidence that the bluff shouldn't be an issue. So we asked to revise our application and to place the cabin where we were in application number 1, and we were denied again. We also contact the Minnesota DNR, not locally here, but in the Twin Cities. And we talked to a person by the name of Dan Petrick, who is a land use specialist with the shoreland and river related programs. Mr. Petrick replied that the bluff setback through the DNRI should only be applied to the land behind the top of the bluff, not the side of the bluff. So it's different than the interpretation that we're seeing from the county right now. And please note that Mr. Petrick is a land use specialist and not a hydrologist. I would think that would be a little more important, and because that's what he's, the setbacks are what he typically deals with. We also want to note that both Crow Wing County and Aitkin County at one time had side setbacks to the bluff and have since eliminated them. But because we were denied our permit and that additional side setback, that's why we're here today. The additional setback took away more of the reasonable place to build, including where our old cabin had stood for almost 100 years with no impact to the bluff or the lake, leaving the only reasonable place to build next to our neighbor's non-conforming property. In 2022, the county removed the requirement that a surveyor was the one to define the bluff and the bluff setback. Let me expand a little on why I have such strong convictions about where to place our cabin on our property. I've been an architect for over 40 years, and one of the things you'll learn over that many years is the importance of situating your structure on the property. It involves many considerations in this project. It would include the zoning regulations, being near the lake and having physical access to the lake, having views over the water and views into the forest, the planned layout of the interior of the cabin, how rooms relate to the site, wind directions in summer and winter, property grade changes, location of trees and forest, habitat preservation, drainage patterns on the site, location of neighboring cabins and structures, solar orientation and access roads, but also avoiding negative aspects of the site, such as views to the neighbor's pole barn, avoiding road noise, or being adjacent to neighbors' septic systems. And I don't think that anybody that's recommended that we build some other place has looked at all these different things. I have, and that's why I end up with where we are. There are a significant number of items to balance and juggle to get the location just right. And you want to get just right, because if you don't, you will live with those mistakes forever. I hope you will recognize that not every place one can build a cabin is the same as another, because it's not. And the impacts of bad decisions will have an impact on the inhabitants of the cabin. If the new cabin is anything like the old cabin, it will last almost 100 years and will have impacts on future owners of this property as well. The question arises, who should decide where a new cabin should be built? Should it be the neighbors, the county staff, the Board of Adjustment, friends, relatives? How do you answer that question? My answer is that the people that should have the most say are the people that will be impacted by the most, and that would be the owners or inhabitants of the new structure. They will have to live with decisions daily for the remaining time as owners of the cabin. And let me also just kind of jut in there that I may repeat myself a few times, so I apologize for that. So if the county, through regulation, wants to have a say in where a property owner's cabin should be placed, then I believe that the county must have a strong and compelling reason to push for the strict compliance of a regulation. On this particular unique piece of property, I don't think the county has a strong and compelling reason. This is evidenced through engineering analysis of the proposed construction site and by actual similar projects constructed nearby, which both refute that there is a compelling or strong reason. In fact, it's just the opposite. The floor plan that we are proposing is similar to the plans we had proposed in the past. There's a footprint of 1,640 square feet on the main level and about 700 square feet on the upper level. The plans meet all zoning restrictions except the restriction of the bluff side setback. And let me point out too that our old cabin was 936 square feet. It was tiny. And if you want to have guests up there, you couldn't. And so part of the reason we want to enjoy our property, we want to have other people, even our children and their spouses up. And so to say that we can build on the same spot in the same footprint just wasn't, it's not fair to say that. Those who are on the site visit saw that our property is 100% forested with a small clearing where the old cabin and parking were located. The driveway into our property off 320th Street is a gravel road that we share with our neighbors. The steep slope along the lake is completely and naturally vegetated. I believe that our family has been a good environmental steward of this property for decades, and there is no reason why that wouldn't continue. I think that property owners on Lake Alexander have the most at stake regarding the continued health of the lake, as all have made an investment and want to protect that investment as best that they can. Tonight I will show you the science behind the bluff stability. I will show you why the option that we are presenting is the best option for all. I will explain the practical difficulties that we have, and I will show you how our plan meets the county's comprehensive plan better than any other cabin location option. In the end, I hope that you see the truths regarding our project and will vote to grant the variance and allow our project to proceed into construction. Did you know that the idea of bluff regulation originated along the shoreland of Lake Ontario in upper New York State? Bluff regulations eventually migrated to Minnesota. In 1981, the state of Minnesota created the bluff regulations with the enforcement happening at the county level. You can imagine how difficult it would be to create a rule that covers small lakes, large rivers and streams, and every type of soil and rock you can find in Minnesota. The rule makers had to decide how many feet above the high water mark would define the start of the bluff and what the slope of the lake was, and where the bluff was closer to the lake or farther up the slope. Whether the bluff was closer to the lake or farther up the slope. These decisions were not based on physics or mathematical calculations, but estimates of what would be appropriate. The point is that the rules were not specifically made for Lake Alexander in Morrison County. That is why each building site needs to be evaluated individually. Each site is different. The intent of the makers of the bluff rules was not to impose a strict rule over all properties, but to provide general guidance that could serve as regulation for development. The legislation included the use of variances so that the common sense could be used when reasonable requests were made. Therefore, the ordinance allows for variances so that each particular bluff on a particular piece of property can be examined to see if the protection that the bluff ordinance provides is necessary for this particular property. This allows for a decision based on science, logic, and common sense instead of a strict one-size-fits-all approach to land use. A stated goal of the Morrison County Comprehensive Plan is to not treat all properties the same, but each as unique parcels with unique characteristics. I hope that the county staff and my neighbors in Morrison County that make up the Board of Adjustment are willing to let science, logic, and common sense inform the determination made tonight. Take a little break here.
And Kevin, whenever you want me to advance the slides, you just let me know.
Okay, yeah, there's, if you're reading along here, there's numbers. You'll see them on the next page. There are two scientific ways to look at the bluff on this property. The first is the science of engineering. I hired Eric Meyer, a licensed civil engineer in the state of Minnesota, to examine the topography on my property and asked him to make an evaluation of whether the bluff was in any danger of erosion if I were to build a project in the bluff or bluff impact zone. His letter is included in your packet. What Mr. Meyer does every day is to analyze sites, engineer the grading and drainage and utilities on the sites, and thereby protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the state. Mr. Meyer, because of his training, experience, and licensure, is best qualified to provide a professional opinion on the condition of the bluff and the impact that construction will have on the bluff and the bluff impact zone. A licensed professional like me or Mr. Meyer could lose our license to practice our profession and thus our livelihood if we intentionally make a misstatement or try to mislead others in carrying out duties to the citizens of the state. There is no value to Mr. Meyer trying to mislead you on such an insignificant project as our cabin project. Other people may be giving their opinion on this cabin project, but do they have the credentials that Mr. Meyer has? Okay, this is the letter from Mr. Meyer. You can skip through those. Mr. Meyer wrote a letter which outlines his understanding of the bluff and the bluff impact zone. And to quote from his letter, rebuilding the cabin in essentially the same location while within the bluff impact area will not have any impacts to the designated bluff. With the proposed location, the steep slopes of the bluff will be preserved, which meets the intent of the zoning ordinance. Architects such as myself are held to the same rigorous standards as the engineer regarding professional statements, and I also concur with Mr. Meyer's evaluation as two other architects, Katie Leaf and Rosemary McMonigal, in their letters of recommendation for the variance. 4 state of Minnesota certified professionals have reviewed the bluff side setback variance request and have supported the request as appropriate and scientifically sound based on the complexities and practical difficulties of this unique site. Probably the most important factor over general opinion, informed opinion, scientific analysis, or projections is actual past projects built into bluff conditions. The second scientific means for evaluating the impact of construction on our property is to look at case studies of construction in the bluffs that are similar in scope. So you can move on to, there you go. Did you know that there have been, within the last 4 years, 6 completed full cabin or house projects within 1,200 feet of our property? 700 feet to the west of our property, a new home was built at 3807 320th Street. The home was built directly into the steepest slope to the lake. So if this is the lake down here and the slope goes up, they were actually in the slope going down to the lake. The reason they could build there was because that technically it was not a bluff, even though it was 7 feet higher than our property, but it did not have the percentage slope down to the lake to make it a bluff. So it was built in the steepest slope of the lake at an elevation of 1305. 1305 is 28 feet above the ordinary high water mark of the lake and 2 feet higher than our proposal. The construction area was on the steep slope of the lake and was not set back 12 feet from the steepest slope like our proposal. The reason it didn't require a variance was that the slope of the lake was 17%, not the required 30%. If you go to the next picture, Amy. Yep. This is the view of that project from the lake. You can see the water and you can see the construction site during construction. You can see there was no silt fence put up. So, but it was in the shoreland. It was more than 25 feet above the high water mark of the lake. The building location sloped to the lake, and according to the soil profile maps provided by Amy Kowalczyk, it had the exact same soil that our property has. Next picture, please. Similarly, this is the view from the upper part of that bluff. You can see how it's built into the slope down to the lake. Similarly, at 610 feet to the west of our property and adjacent to the previous cabin, a new home was built at 3819 320th Street. The home was also built directly near the steepest slope of the lake at an elevation of 1306, which is 29 feet above the ordinary high water mark of the lake. The reason it didn't require a variance was that the slope to the lake was 22%, not the required 30%. But it was in the shoreland. It was more than 25 feet above the high water mark of the lake. The building location sloped to the lake. It had the exact same soil profile that our property has. For both projects, the possibility of erosion to the lake was much more severe than our proposal because each cabin was built into the steep slope to the lake, whereas our proposal places our cabin 12 feet away from the steep slope and on a shallow slope that slopes away from the lake. Okay. Okay, this is the second one, and you can go on to the next one then. At 49 320th Street, 265 feet to the east of our property, a new cabin replaced an older cabin. This cabin was built in the actual bluff at elevation 1309 or 32 feet above the high water mark of the lake with a slope to the lake of 35%. So both you can, this is the view of that. You can see the new cabin, and this is in a bluff. Okay, at the next picture, please. At 4155 320th Street, 510 feet to the east of our property, a new cabin replaced an older cabin. This cabin was built in what appears to be the bluff impact zone at elevation 1308. This is 31 feet above the high water mark of the lake with a slope to the lake of 38%. Now, if you take a close look at that, there's a 75-foot line from the lake in the bottom. You can see that line where it's 75 feet. And then there's a 50-foot, and the 50-foot is the basically defines the top of the bluff. And so on the very top of that is the top of the bluff. But what they did here was they defined the bluff impact zone going toward the lake, not away from the lake. So this cabin should probably have never built that way if the strict application of the zone clearance was followed. But again, another example of cabins built in the same situation. At 4183 Bayview Road, 110 feet to the east of our property, new cabin replaced an old cabin. This cabin was built in what appears to be the bluff impact zone. This cabin was built on land that was 25 feet above the high water mark of the lake with a slope of the lake of 35%. This is the view of that during early construction. And finally, at 4195 Bayview Road, 1,200 feet to the east of our property, a new cabin replaced an older cabin. This cabin was built in what appears to be just 1 foot below the elevation where it would have been considered the bluff. This cabin was built on land that was 24 feet above the high water mark of the lake with a slope to the lake of 34%. For each of these projects, I asked Amy Kowalczyk if during the construction of the house or cabin, was there any reported soil erosion that caused soil to be transported into the lake? And in each case, Amy answered that there was no documented case of soil erosion into the lake. So this is a section view of, and this is where I want to stand up and use my ruler that I brought. It wasn't for my wife to hit me with. So this purple line, this thick one, that's the slope of our land to the lake. So this is the lake down here, and this is the slope of our property. This slope right here is 4155. This is the section cut through that property. This is 4049. 4183 is right here. It's similar, very similar to ours, and 4195 is right there. The only two kind of outliers are the ones that were built in this slope, 3819 and 3807.
Kevin, is that all the different properties you just talked about? Because
Yes.
that's not clear to me.
Oh yeah, those are the 6 properties, right, plus ours.
So we're the purple and everybody else are the others.
Right. To summarize, 6 actual construction cases with property characteristics similar to or defined as bluff or bluff impact zones, and not one case of erosion into the lake. Along with the professional evaluations, this evidence suggests that the construction on our site would not cause erosional bluff, nor cause eroded soil to be transported into the lake. All these sites were more onerous than our site. 2 cabins were built on the steep slope to the lake. 2 cabins were built in the bluff or bluff impact zones with steep slopes to the lake of over 30%. And 2 cabins built at or close to the elevations that define a bluff with steep slopes to the lake of over 35%. I have discussed the excavation required for our cabin with the excavator we expect to hire for the project, Mike Altrichter. He told me that he did not have any concerns about the excavation and did not think that the excavation would cause any erosion of the bluff. He also said that during excavation, he can keep his equipment away from the steep slope to the lake and minimize any disruption of the existing vegetation. He would also set up additional precautionary measurements prior to construction, such as installing a silt fence and covering exposed soil with mulch. During our last hearing, the county provided documents regarding soil that came from the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the USDA. This document 1 map is for shallow excavations, identifies in a broad brush way the soils that are generally found in the vicinity of 3945 through 20th, which is our property. The grayish color on the map is the lake. The red area is the steep slope to the lake. The green area is the area that we are proposing to build on. From the legend in document 2, one can see that the green area is rated as not limited. In other words, the soil scientists behind this mapping of soils believe that the shallow excavations in this type of soil should should have no limitations. It's perfectly okay for all construction methods. Document 3, dwellings without basements, which is what ours is, has a rating of not limited as well, where slopes are 1 to 8%, which is the range of slopes we wish to build in. Not limited indicates that the soil has very favorable features for the specified use, good performance, and low maintenance can be expected. Also from the USDA regarding Monaga series soils, drainage and permeability excessively drained. Surface runoff is moderately low to moderately high. Permeability is rapid. This is the highest rating soil can have for drainage and permeability. To move a grain of sand from one point to another, something must push it. Water can push it, but for the water to push it, it has to be running water. Soil profile indicates that soil on our property is excessively drained and has rapid permeability, which means that raindrops are quickly absorbed into the soil. They do not collect on the surface and run. If raindrops cannot gather together and run, they cannot push soil in any direction. When I pushed the bucket of water over during our site visit, you could see that the water did not run toward the lake. The water also soaked into the soil rapidly, even though it had been raining and the ground was still saturated from melting snow. The bucket had 6 inches of water in it, and the water ran less than 6 feet. Roughly speaking, this was the equivalent of 1 inch of rainfall per square foot in about 1 minute of time. Little Falls receives 28 inches of rainfall per year, or about 3.5 inches per month. Heavy rain is about 1/3 of an inch per hour. For that reason, the likelihood of erosion with this soil type on these shallow slopes is insignificant. Document 3, entitled Corrosion of Concrete, page 103 indicates that the soil found in the area of our proposed cabin may have minerals that are detrimental to concrete. However, it only raised the risk as moderate. And I'm not really sure what to do with this information, but I am confident that the majority of the houses and cabins on Lake Alexander have foundations and footings made with concrete. And what about the cabin that we tore down? That cabin built with a concrete footing and foundation was still standing 97 years after it was built, and the concrete showed no signs of deterioration. And this was concrete that was hand mixed on site and not as sophisticated as present day concrete mix design. Past performance, especially over a long period of time, is a superior measure of expected future performance. At a previous hearing, it was suggested that our forest, which I stated earlier covers 100% of our property, is not healthy. I'm not sure why that statement was made, but for the idea that maybe we should cut our forest down and put the cabin there. We had Tony Miller, a DNR forester, visit our property in May of 2020. His evaluation of our forest was that it is healthy and in good condition. He said that in all his years inspecting forests, this was one of the most perfectly preserved forests he has seen. If you look around Lake Alexander, you'll see that many of the cabins don't have forests any longer, where our property still does. Forests were the original natural habitat around Lake Alexander, and the comprehensive plan stresses the imperative to preserve the forests. I estimate that we would need to cut down as many as 30 trees to build a cabin on our forested land. Why would we cut down our forest when there is already open area to build on? Forest land is so valuable in Minnesota that there are conservation programs that pay property owners to preserve their forests. From the DNR website, Minnesota's forests supply timber products, provide wildlife habitat, keep our water clean, offer recreation activities, and provide aesthetic and cultural benefits. Loss of forested areas poses an increasing threat to Minnesota's natural resources. As forests are fragmented and disappear, so do the benefits they provide. And that's exactly what we would be doing if we cut down our forests, is we'd be fragmenting the forest in our area. From the Landowner's Handbook, Minnesota DNR publication, the greatest threat to these species is habitat loss or degradation, which affects over 80% of these species in this area. Lakeshore development is a major cause of habitat loss, and is increasing in the area as summer and year-round lake homes become more popular. Forests play important roles in protecting clean water by absorbing and filtering water and by stabilizing soil and preventing erosion. Therefore, changes in the forest landscape can impact water quality. A land use changes as land use changes shrink forest cover, especially along shorelands. Contaminated runoff meets less resistance before reaching your local lake. Forests provide a great many ecosystem services, which are free services provided by nature that we often take for granted. You're familiar with some of them: clean air, clean water, healthy soils, erosion control, and wildlife habitat. Forests also help control weather patterns by regulating temperature in the water cycle. Importantly, forests store large amounts of carbon in roots, trunks, limbs, and soils. In fact, about half of the weight of a tree is carbon. Healthy growing forests absorb carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas that traps sunlight and warms our planet. Because excess carbon dioxide is building up in the atmosphere as a result of human activities, global temperatures are increasing. Maintaining healthy forests helps store more carbon in wood and soils, which can help slow down current climatic changes. This statement appears to be in harmony with the county's comprehensive plan, whereas cutting down our forest to place a cabin there does not. Cutting down 30-plus trees in our property, specifically the 100-year-old white pines, would significantly reduce the tree line from the lake. And this photo is from the lake looking at our property, and that's our boathouse and boat lift shelter in the center of that photo. Foundation walls, the foundation wall and footing that we are proposing will stabilize the soil in the bluff area. The 8-inch thick concrete wall placed 5 feet below grade and its related footing have a differential movement rating of less than 1/2 inch. So differential rating is what a soil engineer gives to a proposed foundation. And so what that does, it tells you how far that foundation will move over the lifetime of its existence. And so that foundation won't move more than 1/2 inch. My wife was allowed to interrupt me, but she hasn't yet, so.
I was not allowed to interrupt you. I will wanna, if you
Okay.
wanna say something? can
Okay.
you- It's already after 10 o'clock.
Okay.
I think, can we skip the,
No,
Just finish, you're good, keep
what?
finishing,
pardon me?
just keep going.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna continue then. Let's say anyways, so this wall over its lifetime is not expected to move more than 1/2 inch in any direction after it's built. Contrast that with this county's ordinance, which designates a retaining wall system to control soil erosion. Type of wall that the county appears to endorse, I believe, is a retaining wall consisting of modular concrete units. You can move it ahead, Amy. So these are modular concrete units that have weathered over time. I think that the wall that we are putting in will last the lifetime of the building, and that will stabilize the bluff. And it will be there as long as the cabin is there. And this is the example of that wall. You can see there's a concrete wall that extends from the grade down to a rectangular footing. So I want to talk a little bit about personal decisions. At a previous hearing, it was suggested that the location of our new cabin was a personal decision, and that was used as a reason to deny our variance. But what other kind of decisions could it be? Is there such a thing as a non-personal decision? Should our neighbors decide how big our cabin should be, where it's located, what color it is, whether it's a modern design or traditional design? I sure hope not. Can you imagine living in a world where other people make all the decisions for you and then you must live with those decisions? When it comes to the location and design of our cabin, Felicia and I are the only ones that must live with the decisions that are made. And if they are poor decisions that are forced on us, then we will suffer as long as we own this property. I would not wish this on any of my neighbors in Morrison County. At a previous hearing, someone suggested that we have 40,000 square feet of property that was in the setback. So even this hearing, 41,500. within the setback, so you can build our cabin within that area. And that may be technically true, but is that practically true? This is a view of our property. And the purple area on the right-hand side is the DNR setback of 75 feet. And then on the top and bottom of the plan is the 10-foot setback. And on the left-hand side is the road setback. And I understand that's 40 feet, not 50 feet. And then the yellow on the bottom in the middle, that is our driveway, which we share with our neighbors. We can't build on that. And then the green is the forested area, which I am trying to make a case for that we would not want to build in there because it's detrimental to the environment. On the upper right-hand corner, to the left of the purple is, you see in kind of a dark tan, is the actual bluff, along with the part that continues down to the lake. And then the yellow is the bluff impact zone, along with the continuation of that bluff as the county has defined it. And then that red area is the area that I think is the only buildable part of our property, because it's the only part that anybody would build on. There's some purple areas in there. You can see there's a purple area that surrounds the circular bluff setback zone, and it's like nobody would build a circular wall in their cabin to fit that bluff, so you essentially are losing that property. And then there's property, that dark line is, I believe, that if you own a lakefront property, if you can't build on the right side of that lot, then you don't have a lakeshore property, that you might as well build, you might as well buy a property out in the woods and build out there. So I define that's about 50 feet from the DNR setback. And anything to the left of that is, I think, just not something that anybody would do. And I really don't want to be forced into doing that. So this property is lakefront property, and the county taxes it at a higher rate because of that. It is a reasonable expectation that a lakeshore property owner can build a cabin close to the 75-foot DNR setback. All people, not just us, want to be able to see the lake, have views across the lake, easily access the lake for swimming, boating, or other activities. And I define that area as roughly 50-foot strip of property extending along the 75-foot lake setback line. When you go beyond this 50-foot strip of land, the reasonableness of where you build is greatly diminished. Practically, there is only about 7,500 square feet of property that people would feel is reasonable to build on. And because of the bluff and the bluff impact zone, that number is reduced to less than 2,800 square feet, which is the red shading there. And then I want to point out that a lot of that and the red shading is right adjacent to our neighboring non-conforming property in the driveway that services both properties. The non-conforming property is only 55 feet wide. The zoning ordinance requires a lot width of 120 feet. The main impact of this width discrepancy is that the four structures that are on the neighboring lot are closer to our property than they would likely be if the property were 120 feet wide. In fact, two of the structures don't meet the required 10-foot building setback. The main cabin is 3.5 feet from the property line, and the bunkhouse is 4 feet from the line. The reality of this is that the human activity that happens on the adjacent property is right next to the property line and often spills out over the line onto our property. This picture is a good example of that. You can see that they've parked a truck and that hangs out into our property. Their picnic table is there, and the clothesline on the right is the clothesline that they use. And I'm okay with that because they don't bother us, but if we had to build closer to them, that would really destroy their property. I mean, because they would have to deal with all those different issues, and it would create some tension between the two neighbors. So the Minnesota State Building Code requires exterior walls and our occupancy, which is what the neighbor's cabin is. It's a residential occupancy. Requires to have a 1-hour rain when located less than 5 feet from the property line. The Roush cabin is located only 3.5 feet from the line, and the building walls are not 1-hour rated. That places our cabin, if we were to build close to them, at a higher risk for fire, smoke, and water damage should a fire break out at their cabin.
and not read.
All right. So my wife suggests that we just look at the options and that I don't read anything. So this option is building next to the road. And the problem with this is, well, number one, you cut down all kinds of trees. Number two, you're so far away from the lake, you can't even see the lake. And, you know, you get road noise, and that's where the ticks and the mosquitoes hang out. And it's just not a viable place for anybody to put a cabin. It's not just us saying that, it's anybody that owned this property would not put a cabin in this location. But
It destroys all the natural habitat back
yeah,
there.
destroy all the natural habitat.
Yeah.
I showed you this out on the site on Friday, building behind the bluff impact zone. Again, we're looking right into the forest, not looking at the lake. And you're taking down all kinds of trees, including those 100-year-old white pine trees. You don't get any solar orientation here because you're behind all kinds of trees. And I don't think that the county wants us to take down trees in the bluff impact zone. Am I right about that, Amy? That the county does not want us to take down trees in the bluff impact zone.
When it's related to creating a view corridor, you can, or if they're diseased or dying, but otherwise, no.
Okay, so this couldn't create a view corridor because there is the bluff impact zone, but right between that and the lake is the bluff. And I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't be allowed to take all the trees down to create a view corridor. All right, the next location is, this is a location where we're right next to our neighbors. And I've already identified a lot of the different issues with that. So I want to point out that the comprehensive plan requires preserving the natural habitat, and some of these plans would destroy natural habitat. The comprehensive plan requires an environmentally sound approach. This is the opposite because it destroys trees. There's also an economic cost, not only for the property owners having to spend up to $20,000 to remove trees and take out stumps, but there's a cost to the county. As a property with a cabin in these locations would have a lower value and reduce tax revenue to the county. The CP requires development to balance economic concerns with environmental concerns and neighborhood concerns. In this location, none of these locations do that. Option 3 this is option 4. We'll skip to that. Option 4 is to turn the cabin 90 degrees basically. And the issues there is that we're right up against the DNR setback on the right-hand side, and we're right next to the road, our access drive that we share with our neighbors on the left-hand side. And where do you put the bedrooms? You put the bedrooms on the right-hand side so that they face the lake and you can't see the lake from like a living room. Or you put the bedrooms on the left-hand side where they're right next to the driveway. So I discount this because it's just, I mean, think about the confrontational views we would have. I mean, our neighbors would be looking at us and we'd be looking at them if we had windows on our side. If we didn't have windows, they'd be looking at a blank wall, and none of that's very friendly.
Mr. Chair, can I interrupt?
Go ahead.
I just want to interrupt just because we're here, and then we don't have to go back to that. Just on this option 4, how far would like the corner be like from the neighbor's house then? So that'd be the southwest corner, is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know roughly. If I were to guess, you can see there's a 10-foot setback there. I'd say maybe 20 feet.
Okay.
25 feet maybe.
Okay. I just figured I'd ask that quick. Sorry for interrupting you, but being we were on the screen.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. Another thing about this is that this can't be a passive solar house because what would happen is you would heat the right-hand side of the house. The left-hand side of the house would get no sun. And so you would never be able to balance the heat in that house. It'd be like the hot part and there'd be the cold part. And so it'd be very difficult to get that. The beauty of having a elongated axis to the south is that you can heat each of the rooms you know, at the same time, so they all get the same amount of heat. So anyways, again, this option will be a devastating option for us and our neighbors. Both of us, you know, when we're out there trying to enjoy our places, we would be like on display. We'd be like on a stage with them looking at what we're doing and them, you know, looking at what we're doing instead of having some privacy. And I think that the character of the neighborhood of this area that we inhabit, the character is one of, we have space between cabins. We don't have cabins right next to each other, and so we have some privacy. And I think that's what everybody desires. So if we, again, we're going against a comprehensive plan if we can't protect the neighborhood, and if we have to build next to our neighbors, we're not protecting the neighborhood. And I would say that in our neighborhood also, we have trees, we have a forest, and we like that. All of us, our neighbors, we like having those forests, and cutting down part of our forest does not protect our neighborhood. If you look at the plain language of the words practical and difficulty, well, let me point out one more thing. Can we go back a slide? You know, either to build here or the other where we're turned 90 degrees, we can build right up to that 75-foot setback line. But that's where the steep part of the lake starts. And so we can build right in that line. You'd be digging a 5-foot hole right where that steep slope starts. And the problem and the reason the angle of the lake is important is because I have more land along the 75-foot setback. Once I go to the north, go this way, it starts to skinny up. And so you can't put a full cabin when you go backwards with that. And again, again, it's confusing to me why people think that, you know, if we build up, we can build up to that 75-foot line on the west side of our property, but we can't build further to the east where we want to build, even though we're set farther back from the lake, because it seems to me that if you're worried about erosion and water and sand and silt going down the lake, the worst place to build is on the west side of our property. But that's really the only place that we have left to build, unless we get a variance. So if you look at the plain language of the words practical and difficulty in the dictionary, you come up with this. Practical infers something that is economical, efficient, and common sense. Difficulty is the opposite of easy, or something that is not easy, it's hard. So a practical difficulty is something that is hardship or an uneasy thing that is a common sense difficulty, something that most people would find difficult or problematic, like having the bluff and bluff impact zone removed from consideration nearly 2/3 of our prime buildable area, the area that most cabin owners are allowed to build on our lake. Having the remaining prime buildable area adjacent to non-conforming property, decreasing privacy and increasing tension between neighbors. Building in the forest is a practical difficulty because it violates the comprehensive plan and it goes against the common sense and efficiency of building on the already open space. It exposes the owners to increased health risks from ticks and mosquitoes and increases fire hazard. You know that the DNR recommends that you maintain a 30-foot setback between your structure and any forest. And the reason they do that is to protect your house from fire. If you're building out in the forest, it's pretty hard to do that. Having the shoreline and DNR setback line at a 30-degree angle to the main orientation of your property, which compounds a practical difficulty of having a bluff take up 2/3 of your buildable property. It's a practical difficulty to build in locations when building in those locations violates the county's comprehensive plan. One cannot insist that there are other options if the other options violate the county's comprehensive plan. It's not common sense to judge a proposed location using the comprehensive plan and then ignore the comprehensive plan when judging other options. The neighboring property being narrow, non-conforming property is a practical difficulty because with a narrow property, the structures are packed onto the property, and the activity that happens on the property being the structures are much more present and obtrusive than if the property were conforming. So when the only reasonable available land to build on is next to the non-conforming property, that is a practical difficulty. The practical difficulty is increasing the fire hazard between the cabins, forcing one cabin to be built adjacent to the cabin that was built in the required structure setbacks. The shared driveway is a practical difficulty because of prescriptive easement rights that guarantee the right of each property owner to continue use of that property. Lack of access to the sun for solar energy is a practical difficulty. When your home is too close to either side of your property, solar access decreases because the neighboring properties have fully grown trees that shade your property for half of the day. The only reasonable location is to be in the center of your property that is already cleared and has proved to be an optimal location by all standards. There is no official list of practical difficulties. A property owner can't just find a list of practical difficulties and go down the list and either you have one or you don't. Why is that? Why is there no list? I believe that there's no list because if you had a list, there would always be another one and one after that and so on. Aren't the property owners who are the most intimate with the conditions on their property the ones that see the practical difficulties most clearly? Every property has unique setting. No two properties are ever the same. That means that every property is unique, and uniqueness gives way to practical difficulties. I'm close to my summary here, so.
Can I jump in before your summary?
Okay.
All right.
You only have a minute.
Great. One of the things that I want to make clear is that when we had our first variance hearing, we were told that our lot was a completely conforming lot, that the survey was accurate, and that someone had questioned the accuracy of that survey, and the same DNR representative who now says that the survey is inaccurate verified it was accurate then. We relied on what we were told at that board meeting when they denied our variance. If we would just move it out of that bluff and bluff impact zone, we could build. And we were disappointed that we didn't get to build where we wanted, but we said, okay, let's do it. And we tore down our cabin. My husband lined up all the contractors. We went in to get the building permit, and then someone at the counter says, oh no, can't do it. We have never had anybody explain why they said it was okay to do, and then when we go to get the building permit, it's not okay. We've never had anyone apologize to us for the damages that that decision made. We had a paid-off home that we took out a mortgage on to get money to build this cabin that we are still paying thousands of dollars in interest every year since when we first brought this up. Something's changed that day at the county where they became adversaries to us. Everything has been couched in negative terms, and when the Morrison County DNR hydrologist says that there's a side setback, that's his opinion. The guy at the state who is above him says there is no side setback. Jacob Free, who is the hydrologist for Aitkin and Crow Wing County, said there is no side setback, and I have all kinds of documents from them where they actually had a side setback in their ordinance. In 2014, it was spelled out top, bottom, and side. They struck through it, and now when you look at their ordinance, there is no side setback. They also have implemented DNR standards that Morrison County has not, that you can look at the slope over a course of 10 feet, not 50 feet. And so all of these conditions I'm not going to go into anymore other than to say that we shouldn't need a variance for this proposal. That side setback to a bluff is not, has never been justified other than by one person, and when we have other people giving different opinions, I think that's significant. The other thing that's never been offered to us are any mitigation strategies. When I look at all the many variance requests for building into a bluff or bluff impact zone, all of those folks were given options to mitigate any damage that might be caused. We strongly feel there is no damage. One thing that always comes up is removing the boathouse. But then Amy mentioned at the site that there were these new, or someone mentioned that new guidance was coming up about trying to get people to remove boathouses. But what I found was that we We are not willing to remove that boathouse because we're old people and we can't haul stuff down those steep steps and be able to enjoy our boat and go fishing. But we can elevate that on fill, or we could waterproof that boathouse. And that allows you to meet those federal standards so that you can get the funding that you want for that. We don't need to remove the boathouse. We have left all the natural vegetation in, but Shannon Wetstein was at the site, and she said that there was stuff that we could do to mitigate the erosion of our shore area. We are willing to do that. We've never been offered that as a way to mitigate intrusion into what might be a bluff setback zone. There are all kinds of shoreland standards that other counties use for mitigation purposes. For example, you rate your property using these factors, and it's all based on mathematics, where what kind of lake you have, what kinds of things that you're willing to do, and we rate 73 out of 100 for our lake, and if we get that up to 100, then we get our variance, if we were in the counties to the north. There's also Score Your Shore that the Minnesota DNR has, and when we score our shore, it rates just about 100% because we're doing all the things that a responsible, environmentally concerned landowner would do. We haven't touched the vegetation on the bluffs. We don't cut down trees. We don't bring sand to make a sandy beach like neighbors have. And it's just so frustrating that we're doing all the right things. We did what we were told. We moved the plan out of that impact zone, and then another impact zone was thrown in and caused us a lot of hardship. And one of the things that can be considered in a variance is if mistakes were made by the staff, that you can consider that when you're looking at someone's variance request, that we were misled or the rules changed. And now that I've done more research, I don't think the rules have changed. I've spent 38 hours doing continuing education study on issuing of variances and what all of the requirements and rules are. And I hate to say this because so many things are not done according to the way that they should be done. Okay, I just think that we're not asking for anything that hasn't been done before. I'm looking at, I've got 8 variance requests for building into bluffs, on bluffs, excavating bluffs that were approved with all this wonderful language about very little excavation will be needed. There's no apparent erosion on the bluff that the applicant wants to build into. I can support this. The new home will be hidden in the trees from the lake. Although this is a large addition, the well-vegetated bluff will provide screening with leaf-on conditions, which we have. We've got somebody, it's just too much. It's too much to have all that and to be said that we have a big building envelope. That's not a factor that should be considered in a variance request. You're supposed to look at our proposal and not options. And I'll stop.
Okay.
Because I'll get hit with the stick.
All right. So I want to try to summarize where we are and finish this up. So the science that was presented indicates that the bluff and bluff impact zone will not erode or be impacted by the construction of our cabin, and therefore there can be no erosion of soils from the construction site into the lake. On the lakeshore property that gets taxed at a premium, it's reasonable to build a cabin adjacent to the 75-foot lake setback so that the value that the county places on lakeshore can be fully realized. Felicia and I are investing in Morrison County in hope that our investment maintains its value over time. The location of our cabin is personal but not uniquely personal. We believe that anyone who owned our property would be approaching the decision about where to locate the cabin in the same way. It's not a fair statement to say that it's only a personal decision. The county's comprehensive plan is used to assess the proposed location of our cabin, then it must also be used to assess any other options for cabin location. Our analysis of the other options clearly shows that the other options are in serious violation of the comprehensive plan, and our location is the most compliant with all important and valid aspects of the comprehensive plan. It's not reasonable to ask us to build a cabin in the driveway we share with our neighbors. It's not only unneighborly, but it's also illegal to violate the neighbor's prescriptive easement rights. Building our cabin on the far west side of our property next to our neighbor's non-conforming property would be detrimental to both parties, decreasing privacy, increasing fire and safety hazard, and have a detrimental effect on the value of both properties. Granting a variance does not create a non-conforming situation. By law, the variance is an exception to the current zoning rules. It is not the creation of a non-conforming property. The creation of a non-conforming property is when a change to the zoning regulation is made, but permits an existing use to continue. The location that we wish to build our cabin requiring a variance meets the spirit of the zoning ordinance in the comprehensive plan and is the least disruptive to the neighborhood and to the environment. I believe that the proposed cabin meets the county's comprehensive plan better than any other optional locations. Our understanding is that the board considers our variance proposal only and should not consider other options. I believe that we will not have reasonable use for our property unless we're allowed to build within 50 foot of the DNR setback, because that would make our location the same as most other cabins on Lake Alexander. The character of our neighborhood includes cabins on forested land with ample separation between cabins for privacy. Building a cabin adjacent to our neighbors to the west would not be neighborly or continue prior levels of privacy. Cutting down our forest does not preserve the character of our neighborhood. Our unique lot includes an adjacent non-conforming property with structures that don't meet setbacks, a bluff and impact zone that take up 2/3 of the land that people buy lakeshore property for to build a cabin, a shared driveway with our neighbors that prohibits building on it, and the angle and slope of the property, which along with the county's comprehensive plan negatively impacts all the other difficulties. I'm almost done. We did not create these difficulties, but have discovered that they exist through the process of trying to obtain a building permit. The practical difficulties are much more than economic consideration. In fact, the economic considerations are almost irrelevant to this application. Minnesota Statute 394.27 subparagraph 7 requires that the variance application be in harmony with the general purposes, intent of the land control ordinance and the comprehensive plan. This application has established that the proposed cabin location is in harmony with the land control ordinance and the comprehensive plan. It meets the intent and is more harmonious than any other alternative location on this property, and therefore meets the spirit of the law. We have established that there are practical difficulties with complying with the ordinance, and they are as follows. While having a bluff on your property is not unique, how the bluff impacts this property is unique. This bluff and setback to the bluff consumes nearly 2/3 of the prime buildable area. We have a driveway that we share with our neighbors for as long as there have been cabins on the two properties, which our attorney has advised us would preclude us from building on or moving the driveway because of prescriptive easement rights. The property to the west of our property is only 55 feet wide, making it a non-conforming property, and because of that, placing our cabin adjacent to their non-conforming structure alters the visual and audio privacy that currently exists. Our property and our neighbors' properties are forested. Building adjacent to either property line within the forest on our property would not provide for adequate access to the sun for solar heating system, which is a practical difficulty as stated by Minnesota Statute 394.27 subdivision 7. We have established that the cabin location we propose is reasonable, and not only reasonable, but the most reasonable location on the property. Our proposed location is the only location that would not alter the character of our neighborhood, because it would be built in line with neighboring cabins and be built closer to the center of our property, which would help maintain the privacy between cabin neighbors that currently exists and is essential to the character of the neighborhood. The The principal practical difficulty is that by not building on the available clear and open land, we are violating the county's comprehensive land use plan and the reasons that the zoning laws even exist. Forcing the cabin to be built in our forests will require destroying existing natural habitat, increasing rainwater runoff by removing tree foliage and root systems, and removing trees that provide environmental benefits through carbon sequestration. These are fully grown trees that provide maximum sequestration. Forcing the cabin to be built on the west side of the property will have a huge negative impact on our neighbor's cabin property, including lack of visual and sound privacy, increased fire danger, destroy the character of our neighborhood, and decrease the value of both properties while decreasing tax revenue to the county. I have explained the duty required by the comprehensive plan to treat each property as unique property. I've shown you the science of engineering and case studies that indicate that the bluff on our property will not be impacted during construction. I have explained our practical difficulties, and I've shown you how our proposed plan meets the county's comprehensive plan better than any other option. I believe that what we are requesting is reasonable and that we should be granted a variance for our property. So, yeah, and so that is the end of my presentation. So thank you for your patience. I know it was long, but again, this is really important to us, and as an architect, it would really be tough for me to have to build on a site that I don't think is really a really good idea.
Okay, that's a lot of information. We only have one person out in the audience, or out in the public, and that's Shannon Weston. I think if it's okay with everybody, it'd be a good time to hear from her right now, if it's good for you, Shannon.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to make a few comments and then I'm going to leave for the evening. So my name is Shannon Wetstein. I'm the district manager at the Morrison Soil and Water. I have been witness to the last two variances and this one as well. And in those previous variances, I did submit comments. Basically, I commented on the site and that there was more than adequate room to build a cabin outside of the setback. I also spoke to the soils, which, although they do drain well, they are very susceptible to erosion when they're disturbed. I also pointed out my role as a district manager and the role that I have with administering the water plan and how Lake Alexander falls into some broader plans that we've helped with partners identify priorities for this area. But I'm not going to go into that stuff because basically, the Bushes have pointed out and publicly claimed that I can't possibly give an opinion, a professional opinion, as I'm not qualified. So I'm going to comment and take a different approach and speak from a more common sense approach and point of view, as you've heard the applicants also say tonight. And this might not help you make your decision, because I think ultimately they have more than enough room to build. But if I'm a person, like I am, looking at this site, going out there where they're proposing to put their house, I look at that side hill and see this is steep, okay? I don't know where the bluff or what the bluff means or the bluff setback, but that's really close, and that's a steep slope all the way across. The reason to build your house back is for the protection of you and your investment. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, oh, it's really steep right there, the kids are out here, so we're going to have to do some alterations because I'm worried about someone getting hurt. I've heard that many times on shoreline properties. Second is, if the applicant really truly wanted to give their neighbor and themselves some privacy when they're explaining where they want to put this thing. I'm thinking there's a lot more room on this property if you really are concerned about privacy. There's no wetlands, there's no hilly terrain, there's no real difficult infrastructure, so there is no hardship on this site other than a driveway, which is totally workable. And I'm going to be a little harsh here on my third one, but this is their third request, and I can tell you, they still do not get it, okay? When I ask the question, remove the boathouse, why? Are you planning for a garage? No, not at this time, but yeah, probably eventually. Where do you think that's going to go? It's going to go right in that intense area when they do want to build. Maybe they don't want to, doesn't fit with the design, but the next property owner is going to want a garage and more storage. Where are you going to put it? You're going to put it right next to the house. You're going to connect it to the house. Because who wants a garage that's not connected to your house? I'm sure you guys have heard that before too. They also don't get that this is a local decision. This group here is tasked with making a recommendation. I am the best Morrison County has as a soil and water director. Sorry for you guys. Our DNR hydrologist is the one you get to work with. There's nothing more annoying to me than when I work with landowners that think they're calling above me, but really they're not, right? Because it's a local decision. Doesn't matter if you speak to someone in St. Paul and they tell you something different. It doesn't matter if you speak to someone in Crow Wing and they tell you something different. Morrison County has their ordinance, has their standards, and it is different in situations. Just trying to help you out for your next request, okay? Plain and simple, there's no hardship here. This application was denied in the past because it's all based on personal need. As cool as I think passive solar is, this is not the right site for a passive solar house because, like the applicant said, it can only fit in that location, in that orientation. And it sounds to me, whenever I sit there at a DRT meeting and I hear a landowner talk about what's going on in the property, and tonight what I heard from the landowners was, this site does not meet their needs. Plain and simple, I would have said, it sounds like this site does not meet your needs anymore. But I will say from my professional experience and what my job is at the Soil and Water is to give technical assistance and financial assistance to private landowners to solve soil and water resource concerns. Now, along the water bodies of Morrison County, a lot of them have soils very similar to this site. And I did appreciate the bucket test on site, but what our office is investing a lot of money and a lot of very qualified professional expertise outside of our office in is working on resiliency studies and looking at rainfall, looking at climate, looking at changes, pressures on our resources that will be coming. And again, from just a very practical, simple point of view, I think you guys will all remember just a few years ago, Little Falls had a rain event that was 5 to 7 inches in a very short period of time. It did a lot of damage. The county was dealing with it for a long time. There was private landowners that very much suffered. Just last year in Randall, we had landowners that were reporting 15 inches in a short period of time. Now, I do not think that these events are just one-offs. I think we'll see them more and more often. I think putting pressure on that portion of the lake that is pressured already is not the way we're going to be doing business moving forward. I really hope not anyways. It's like the days of lowering culverts, building in floodplains, digging ditches, building in bluffs. Those days are gone. So, and just for the record, I wasn't offering any sort of mitigation when I was reviewing their shoreline, their immediate shoreline. I was just reviewing it for, there was some erosion, and so offering that we do offer some assistance if they wanted to address that. It was not in a mitigation type discussion. So if anyone has any questions for me, I'd be happy to entertain them. But if after that's done, I will probably be leaving.
Ask a question?
Are you open to a question?
You bet.
Sure, go ahead.
So I presented 6 cabin sites that are adjacent to our cabin. They seem to have been built perfectly fine. What do you think about that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
so I really love that you had all of those displays. If I was your neighbor, I'd think you were one big prick. But I would defer to the zoning office and what was determined for those specific sites. To me, they look different. There was a different criteria that they had to meet. Those sites could use erosion control. The one site you pointed out was missing silt fence. Now, again, it's a responsibility of the landowner during construction and their contractor, and I would guess that they probably could have done a better job at that. I would like to see, but again, it's the landowner's responsibility to meet that permit that they were given. So again, those were examples, but you didn't give any information that it was a permitted activity or what actually the zoning office had determined on those sites.
Can I have a follow-up question, please?
I think that's enough for now. Personally, I think we've heard, plenty of information from you on site and tonight. Do you have any questions for the applicant, Shannon?
So much to say. I guess when you displayed the different locations that you can have for your house, most people can't find even one other spot. That's when this group is potentially looking at a variance with conditions. I've never seen a site that was able to present 4 alternative options, but yet it's appeared that you are still seemingly viewing this through such a small lens that you can't accept any of these other. And I guess I don't think you're ever going to get it either. So no, it's a comment. So I guess I'm done. I should be done.
Yep, I took that as a comment, also not a question. Okay, if there are any questions from board members to Shannon? Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
All right. Well, now it's our turn to hash these things over and come up with answers to the questions. Anybody like to start? You know, I've been to your property 3 times. I was on the board all 3 times, a 3rd time now for this request. And, you know, there's, like you pointed out, just on the lake, there are instances that, that property isn't being cared for as well as it should be. Building hasn't been done as well as it could be. But at the same time, I looked at several of the pictures, and they're going to look where you're proposing to put your house and deck are right on the edge of a very steep slope down to the lake, a 33% slope. That just happens to be, 1 or 2 feet shy of being a bluff itself, height-wise. Slope-wise, it's well in the bluff category. So for all intents and purposes, it has bluff problems, bluff issues. Your proposal has your deck right on the edge of that, which is 75 feet from mine, which was right on the top of that bluff-like incline to the lake, and which is exactly what you were criticizing in another picture. You know, one in 3 feet is a big step, and it's a hazard, as Shannon pointed out, for safety purposes and erosion purposes. There's, I think, also your concern for your neighbor is not a very big concern if you're willing to build that close to them, when you have a perfectly good location that is in the center of the property. It's quite isolated. It does require the removal of trees, but trees are a renewable resource. Trees can be planted and regrown. It would give you the beautiful view of the property, or of the lake, in my opinion. And you say your property is very unique, and that the angles, the double impact of that bluff being a side hill and whatever. I agree with that, but it's also very unique, as Shannon pointed out, in that it has a huge building envelope. It's very unique that a property would have 41,000 square feet of buildable area, and part of that buildable area is only like 125 feet from the lake, and would provide a great view to the lake, and great access to the lake. And you're right, our decision today does impact future owners. If we were to grant your request, it'd be a non-conforming structure that would require a variance to add onto, and likely a future owner would like to add a garage onto that. That would be a variance request. Is that something that a board in the future would allow? I don't know. They'd probably point out, well, you've got 40,000 square feet of building space. Why attach it to a non-conforming structure? So there is impact in the future. And you had mentioned personal needs. It was personal preference, design preference. I can think of, personally myself, of 20 different ways to build. And if I pick one that, or places to build out there, that is against, that does not fit with ordinance, that is a personal preference, not one calculated for the best use of the property. So that's my take. I think I answered quite a few of the questions with that dialogue, but we will be answering these questions separately also. Would anybody else like to add to that before we go to the questions?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, John.
Who's Dr. Faber, Amy?
He is he was speaking on his own behalf, but he's also the president of the Lake Alexander Improvement District.
Okay.
And he's a doctorate in natural resource. I don't know exactly, but he teaches natural resource protection at the college in Brainerd.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Bush, thank you for the amount of work. This is obviously an excessive amount of information and time to prepare, and you said something during your presentation about an apology being warranted. I'm happy to apologize on behalf of your experience overall. Sorry, sometimes this stuff gets hard. You started the presentation with referencing your property and how it should be viewed individually, and then you went into the other 6 properties and how we should take them into consideration. Just clarification, what were you hoping to have happen? Individually viewed or consideration with the other 6 properties?
Is there a question to me?
Don't I still have the floor?
But you can't direct your questions
I'll direct it to
directly at
you.
him. You have to get to me.
All right, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. What was your question?
I would like to address the applicants.
I will when you have your question stated, and I can refer it to him.
Can I just,
Go ahead. It's getting late.
Advice, please. Roll call.
Yeah, normally you ask permission from the chair. I'm sorry. Permission from the chair to,
for each individual question?
well, that's
I
normal.
said, Mr. Chair, can I speak?
Please do.
Right, and then I asked Amy, so then when I'm done with Amy, I say, Mr. Chair, can I keep going?
To what end, we'll see. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Do you remember my question?
No.
Yeah, me either.
You started your presentation with referencing your property and how it should be viewed as a unique and individual property. Then you went into saying you should consider all these other 6 properties. I'm just wondering which direction were you hoping this board take?
The purpose of identifying the 6 other properties was to make a point that those 6 properties are similar in the bluff and the bluff setback nature of the property, and yet none of those properties, even though they had construction, none of those damaged the bluff or the bluff impact zone. And so the point is that we're overly concerned with that on my property. And to me, if there's really not a reason, and I'm using those 6 properties, not a reason to push that variant or that regulation, because there's 6 properties that also built in similar situations, then to me that would mean that we should not be looking at that so hard.
Yeah,
Mr.
I don't know
Chair?
if that answers the question or not.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, that answers your question.
Can I keep going?
Sure.
All right. So you brought up the foundation specifically and how the foundation of the home is designed and how it would prevent or help with erosion control. If I heard the presentation correctly, this is the first time in any of these lakeshore variance requests that I've heard anybody reference that there is a science behind it. So can you explain how the foundation specifically assists in erosion control?
I don't think I said erosion control, but I did say it would stabilize the soil and the soils in that
Okay.
bluff and the bluff impact zone. So that foundation will not move. It'll move maybe a ½ inch over its lifetime. So as long as that foundation is there, the soil on either side of it will be there. And so it will stabilize that entire bluff area.
Okay. Am I still good?
Yep.
Okay. I heard folks about the 75-foot setback from the water. You're not in any violation on that, and the only thing we're talking about is whatever's to the east in the bluff impact zone. If I read this and heard this and followed everything correctly, with plenty of envelope across the rest of the property, minus the neighbors being a touch close on this. At the end of the day, what you have to do is go back to is this a reasonable request? Like, is it reasonable to put an actual structure where you're asking to put it? Are we putting anybody in jeopardy? Are we impacting anybody negatively? Are we really impacting the shoreline here negatively? I haven't heard a single piece of evidence or documentation at this point that says if something goes here with this concrete, with this amount of weight, with this type of anything, this is what's going to happen with the soil. Because we talk about all of the other things, what happens when we might have a different homeowner, or we might add a garage, or we might add anything, but nobody says, well, if you have this type of structure on this part of the property, on this type of land, this is what actually happens, because here's all the evidence we have over the last 75 to 80 years based on how people have built previously, which we should have enough evidence and information around. So I'm on the other side of the aisle with this one, just based on well, facts.
Well, I think that's why I pointed out the 6 other properties that were built without damage to the bluff impact zone. And so there's no reason to think that our construction in the bluff impact zone would impact that or the bluff. And I guess the other thing too is that if we were concerned about like traffic on, construction traffic on the bluff, we could fence that off during construction so nobody could actually be on the bluff.
For the record, the other properties, from an influence perspective, don't
I think
do
to
much.
your point, though, we had a cabin there for 100 years, and it did not destabilize. The foundation never moved. We had to dig it out. There were no impacts at all, and in the first variance hearing, it was clearly stated that nobody saw that there was going to be any impact to the bluff.
Right. Mr. Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, John. Anybody else have questions for the applicant? Are we ready to go to the criteria questions? Okay,
Mr. Chair,
go ahead.
just a few comments, and there might be a question here. First, I'd like to and appreciate you left the site hill natural. And we talked at the site here, and it was me bringing it up, and maybe I shouldn't have brought it up, but I did what I did, is the only thing that was non-conforming was the boathouse, and in years to come, it was part of the plan. So that's just why I brought that up. And in years past, people used that as leverage, whatever, to get what they wanted, and we'd remove that. That's why I brought it up, just planting a seed. The next comment I've got to make is you have a conforming lot, which is great, beautiful lot. A little concerned about some of the old trees of what would happen, someone driving through and the wind come and knocked on it, but that's your business, and you have obviously had qualified individuals looking at it and deciding this is what we need to do, which your conforming lot is 174 feet by, 74,000 square feet of building, or area of a lot, which is huge, something we don't see a lot of in that lake. Could you build a home that would meet all setbacks? Absolutely. Could it be redesigned? Absolutely. Yeah, but I don't blame you for asking for relief from the setbacks. I see what you're after and why you're after this here. A home place right next to your neighbor is not a good idea. Placing a home or cabin in the bluff impact zone is also not a good idea. But you know what I'm kind of torn with to decide, as Kevin, you were pointed out, the erosion on the side hill that was just starting where the dock used to be in. What's going to happen 100 years from now? Granted, the other cabin used it, and you've done things and left things natural, which I appreciate, but that's kind of what I have to digest here. But no questions, just making them comments. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marv. Anybody else like to comment? Ready to go to the questions? Okay, one other thing I'd like to add just before we go to the questions is that this is a duplex lot. Duplex lot allows for the building of guest houses, which, gives you another option even to build a smaller, less impactful main cabin and a smaller guest cabin. I'm just pointing out that your lot is sufficient for a lot of different uses. Okay, on to the questions. First question is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? If it's okay with you, Brent, we'll start with you.
Sure. It's in harmony in that they want to build where they want to, but it's not permittable, so it's not in harmony that way. However, the applicants are allowed to make a request for variance, which brings them here tonight. So that's their only option, and that's why they're here. So on one hand, I think it's in harmony, and on the other hand, I think it's out of harmony.
Okay, anything else, Brent?
No.
Okay, anybody like to add to that?
I think the sorry,
John?
Mr. Chair. Yep, that time I did it. Sorry. The applicant did point out a number of areas in where he did meet the comprehensive plan, and then obviously there's the ordinance that exists that where he doesn't. So along with Brett, I think there's probably more factors that lean towards the work that was done in this application that are pointed out to meeting the intent.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, building in the bluff when a practical difficulty is not present is not in harmony with the intent of the bluff standards or with the ordinance, and I fail to see a practical difficulty being proven by you tonight, and that is your that is the requirement, that you provide the practical difficulty, that you convince us that there is one, and you haven't provided that. So creating a non-conforming structure is also not in harmony and affects future landowners quite immensely in the future. Okay, anything else on number 1? Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? I go first there. Building a home is reasonable, but it's not reasonable to construct a dwelling within the bluff when ample space is available on the lot to meet all setbacks. The applicant has, this is the 3rd request, and it hasn't changed much since the beginning. The proposed area does not seem reasonable to me in that it just is very close to the neighbor, and even the applicant stated that the closer to the neighbor, the worse it is. He has plenty of room to get far away. It just doesn't seem reasonable to be arguing against yourself and then proposing a design that doesn't even meet your own arguments. So this is all personal design preference, and that's not reasonable. Any additions to question number 2?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
I'd just like to add that I think the part of the non-reasonable part would be that we have a clean lot. We'd be making a nonconformity. If we have allowed us variance, it'd be a nonconforming structure. So then when it's nonconforming structure, it goes with the land forever. Here we got one that is in conformity. I just don't know if we want to make one that's non-conforming.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Clint. Any additions to question number 2? Okay, number 3, will the issuance of variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Clint?
I think, for having a cabin on that property, it maintains it. I'm a lake owner also. I'm also a farmer, but we have a lake cabin. And no matter if I get over east where I have a cabin or west where they're proposing this, which we should worry about the locality. But man, if it's where they propose it, or if it's in the building envelope, or back a little farther, it would mean there's no difference between. So I think it would maintain the essential character of the locality because it's high up. You're going to see it from the lake, whether it be right up to the lake or back farther. I do think it kind of maintained the essential character of the locality just by what else is built around there.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody else like to add to that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, John.
I think when you drive up and down the road and you look at every house, every cabin, every structure that's positioned on that side of the lake, I couldn't even remember driving back from the site viewing how many were back by the road in any way, shape, or form. I think if you were to put it back in the woods, that'd be the only place it would be out of character in regards to the entire side of the lake. But if that's what we're talking about as far as character goes, and he's not building this obnoxious structure, 1,600 square feet, that's going up, any other thing that would be proposed at this point would be out of character technically.
Okay, thank you, John. Any other additions to that? When I think of essential character, I think of how I look at a property and see what could be or what should be. From the lakeside, you aren't going to see a structure from the roadside no matter what. I mean, whether it's in the middle of the property, unless it was right next to the road, which, yeah. And essential character is kind of in the eye of the beholder to a certain extent. But what I see is why would they build so close to the lake? And boy, that's a big structure built into a hillside there. Up the hill a little farther, what a better view, what a better location to center that in the property rather than building right next door to their neighbor. Maybe that is the character of the neighborhood. But when nonconformities become the essential character, and we've been a part of it, what have we accomplished? So creating a nonconforming structure and calling it maintaining the essential character is not something I want to do. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Brent.
just on question number 3, will the issuance of a variance maintain the essential character? I think we need to look at, in 1923, there was a home that was there, and that was the essential character of that locality. And typically cabins on a lake typically want lake views. And I'm sure that's why when there was an original cabin built back when it was built, although it's arguable what the date was, I'm hearing 1920.
It's 23.
That is a void that's there now. Since the cabin has been removed, there's a void on that hillside of where that cabin was. So having something near that location does maintain the existing character of the lake, from the view of the lake, and from the standpoint of lakeshore owners want to have lakeshore views.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Anybody else on question number 3? Okay, we'll move on to question number 4. Is alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? John, your turn.
Well, for the most part, it's because of an ordinance that was brought into play when you had neighbors that didn't have an ordinance when they put their cabin up 3 feet from the property line. That's probably one element of this where you're gonna have to be that close if you put it into the part where you can build right there on the lake shore instead of 24 feet over or 30 feet over. But that's, I don't know, that's light to me. And I get the preservation, I get the environmental friendly approach to maintaining the forests. But lack of the ordinance, previous when the older cabins and homes were going up, that's probably your one thing that you have no control over.
Okay, thank you, John. Any other comments on number 4?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Brent.
regarding the alleged practical difficulty here, while there's a lot to go through with the presentation that we've received tonight, both from staff and from the applicants, there is a lot, and from our site visit as well. The angle of that lot, the neighbor's existing structure that's close to the lot line, the bluff, the driveway, the way the driveway comes in and kind of chews up much of the lot itself, the easements that are there, the solar view that they're trying to get in placement of the home. While it might not be solar panels, it might be just allowing light into the home. Those are potentially alleged practical difficulties that are unique to this property. It is an odd situation, and I appreciate both Kevin and Felicia taking the time with us when we were out there to explain how they feel that this is an alleged practical difficulty due to the circumstances unique to the property.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Anybody like to add to that?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
I do agree with what Brent said. The applicants did a wonderful job with their presentation. It's went above and beyond and, trying to do their due diligence to show us a practical difficulty. And you could put all them things together and maybe I'd fall into that. But we just got such a huge building envelope here. Yes, it's not prime. He keeps talking about prime building area, and prime is in the eye of the beholder. I would almost challenge it that being back across that line, you build a house up a little bit higher, you'll see just as much of the lake as you would if you're right on top of it. And that's just an opinion and back and forth, the eye of the beholder. But so for me when you got so much, and yes, you're not going to build by the road, you're not going to build in the middle of the trees, but there's still so much buildable area. I don't see any practical difficulty here.
Okay, anything else to be added to question number 4? Okay, on to question number 5. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Starting out with you, Marv.
Well, Shannon Westing pointed something out, and I think the way of the future with all the solar powered and battery operated, that is the way of the future. And I appreciate you looking into that. But there's a time and a place for everything. And just putting that piece or that home, turning it the way you like to get the best solar effect, you're absolutely correct. But is that a personal choice? So with that being said, it's your actions asking for a personal choice that tell me I can't support that for that reason. And if there was a home that was more open lot, and this is the lot you got, and you've got to work with it. As I pointed out, my wife's got MS and she can't walk, and I got to live with it. I don't like it. There's things and there's rules and regulations for reasons. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but it is a personal choice, and it's created by your choice here.
Okay. Thank you, Marv. Anything to add to that? Okay, if nothing to add to that, we'll go on to question number 6. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? We'll start with you, Brent.
I think it does. Again, I'll just state what I stated already. with the way that that lot is created, the existing driveway that's in there, the easement, the angle of the lot, that distance from the neighbor, addressing a view to the water for lakeshore view, the solar, the bluff coming into play. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? I think it does. It involves many different things.
Yep. Thank you, Brent. Yeah, I'd agree with that. As negative as I am on these previous questions, you know, you presented very valid considerations throughout about why you have the preference for the design and location that you have. And they're all valid. They're just not acceptable as far as answering some of the previous questions. But as far as this question goes, it is much more than just economic considerations. You've considered many things. Yeah. No time for questions anymore.
Can we table this till another meeting?
Excuse me?
Can we table this discussion till another meeting?
Have a continuance, because it's late.
We're past that. We're ready to vote, I think.
When was the time that we could have done that? When was the time that we could have done that?
We've never done that. I have no idea that you can even do that.
Yes, you have. On many properties, you continue.
No.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Amy.
why are you asking for a
Because-
continuance? Are you
Because-
feeling there's more information that
No,
needs to be given?
I'm feeling that, I keep hearing that we have this large building envelope, and in my extensive work at looking at variance requests, that is not part of you cannot say that we have other options and weigh those other options, or to say that we could put it other places. The other thing that I'm concerned about is this side setback that only Morrison County has and no other county has. I think that is a misrepresentation. And if that side setback isn't there, which it wasn't in variance request number 1, we wouldn't be here tonight.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, at this point, we've got all the information we need, and whether we...
But you're operating
whether-
on incorrect information.
Mr.
Whether
Chair.
go ahead, Amy, go ahead.
Thank you. So, and I'm going to engage Brian at this point. So are you saying, so the purpose of the continuance would be for what? For us to check ourselves? I mean, I'm truly asking that. I'm not asking in a combative way. I'm just asking, what exactly are you asking? Are you saying that we need to realize the error of our ways and correct ourselves? Because I guess that's what I'm hearing. So I want to be clear. Typically, when we continue something, there is a reason for that, and there is something that needs to be done in between the time of now and that continuance. So I need to be very clear on what exactly that is, because it sounds like that's what you're claiming.
I think that this Board of Adjustment needs to understand the side setback to a bluff and what that means. I think that is unclear. I think that this board needs to understand that the only way that our property can become non-conforming is by a legal change in the zoning ordinances, not by granting a variance. But that's been said to us over and over tonight. You cannot make this property non-conforming by granting a variance. Granting a variance is here, and becoming non-conforming is when you change a law that impacts something that's already built. And so there's that, and there's like 3 or 4 other things that I think you're operating from incorrect information, and that I would hope that you would try to seek out the correct information.
So, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So one of the rights that was availed to you this whole way is you do and always had the opportunity to appeal the decision the administrator made regarding something if you felt that was incorrect. That is not what you've done. So essentially, are you asking to turn this into an appeal?
No.
So help me out, Brian.
That's what I was taking it as we haven't even made a decision and you're trying to appeal it already. Brian?
I think the decision to continue the hearing is up to the board. If the board needs additional information, or if there's some.
Or a counter proposal, or?
It sounds like the board's ready to vote, and if you have all the information you need to move forward, then the board can continue.
Mm-hmm. You understand the appeal process? Mm-hmm. Okay. With that, are we ready to vote? Are we, is there any other additions to question number 6? Okay, then we'll proceed to vote. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
John?
Yes.
And Marv?
No.
Okay. Question number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? My answer is no. No. Clint?
No.
John?
Yes.
Marvin?
No.
And Brent?
Yes.
I think we should be doing a tally on this as we go along. I'm sorry I didn't do it on the first one. The first one I had 3 no's and 2 yeses, is that correct?
Yes.
And on the second one, we had 3 no's and 2 yeses, is that correct? Okay, we'll do a tally on each one. Will the issuance of variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself, the answer is no. We have 4 yeses and 1 no. Correct? Number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? John?
Yes.
Marv?
No.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
We have 3 no's and 2 yeses. Okay. Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? Marv?
No.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
And John?
Yes.
Okay, we have 3 no's and 2 yeses. Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than economic considerations? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Marv?
Yes.
We have 5 yeses. Okay, if I'm telling this up right, we have 1 question answered to the affirmative and 5 questions answered to the negative.
No, 2 in the affirmative.
Oh, 2 in the affirmative. I'm sorry, yes, there are 2 in the affirmative. Question number 3 and question number 6. The others to the negative. Okay, thank you for catching me on that. Okay, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we deny this request.
I'll second that. Okay, we'll do a roll vote on this, and is there any, first of all, is there any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Okay, then we'll do a roll call vote on this, and we'll, aye if you're in favor, nay if you're against. We'll start with Brent on that one. The motion is to deny. Are
Nay.
you- Pardon me?
Nay.
Okay. Myself is aye. Clint,
Aye.
John,
Nay.
and Marv.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is 3 to deny and, and 2 opposed to denying. Okay. All right,
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a very long
Yep.
evening for everybody.
yep, it has been a long
Thank you.
night. Thank you. All right, minutes of the previous meeting?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we approve our minutes.
Second that, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, any new business, old business?
Mr. Chair, I don't have either.
Okay. All right, is there a motion to, whatever we do at this time?
A motion to adjourn? I would like to make that motion.
Okay,
I'll second it.
okay, motion has made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay,
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned at 11:30 PM.